I didn't expect much when I took the position at Cranford University. My new office, tucked in the corner of the aged humanities building, reeked faintly of mothballs and dust, and the faculty lounge was more of a storage closet with a coffee machine. But it was a stepping stone, my chance to make an impact. It started small, an email from a colleague, Dr. Willard, who I'd never met, asking me to cover a lecture. I agreed, but when I tried to find him later, no one seemed to know where he was. His name was on the directory, his office listed just down the hall from mine. Yet his office remained locked and untouched. Curious, I asked the admin assistant, Janice, about him. Willard, she said, adjusting her glasses. He hasn't been around in weeks. Must be one of those sabbaticals. Strange, but not entirely unheard of. I brushed it off until I began noticing discrepancies with other faculty members. A professor named Dr. Evans, listed as teaching a philosophy course, had no recent publications or even student reviews. When I sat in on his class, the slides looked polished, the lecture smooth, but his answers to questions were mechanical, almost rehearsed. The unease prickled at the back of my mind, a whisper that something wasn't adding up. Then Willard's name appeared again. This time in a mass email announcing his resignation, effective immediately. No farewell party, no explanation. Just gone. It didn't sit right with me. Fueled by a mixture of suspicion and stubborn curiosity, I decided to dig. I tried accessing faculty records through the university system, but they were locked behind administrative privileges. A quick search online brought up nothing. No academic papers, no mentions on conference rosters, not even a LinkedIn profile. One evening, I stayed late, determined to get answers. The campus was eerily silent, the fluorescent hallway lights flickering. Willard's office door was ajar, and though I hesitated, I pushed it open. Inside, the room was stripped bare. No books, no personal items. Just a desk, an empty file cabinet, and a single sheet of paper on the desk. The paper was blank at first. When I tilted it under the light, faint impressions from earlier writings appeared. Storage 12C. The number meant nothing to me at the time, but a quick search revealed it was a basement room beneath the library, a place not listed on the campus map. I found the room the next night, tucked behind a maze of boiler pipes and electrical panels. The door was heavy, marked only by a small plaque, 12C. I forced it open with a screwdriver. The stale air hit me first, thick and cloying, like a tomb. Inside were rows of filing cabinets, and beyond them, outdated computer monitors buzzing faintly. My heart pounded as I opened the first drawer. Student records. Folders upon folders of names and IDs. Some marked inactive, others missing. I was shaking as I flipped through them, realizing many of these students were ones I'd seen on posters around campus. Have you seen me? On the computers, files labeled profiles and lecture scripts painted a horrifying picture. Scripts for classes matched the monotone delivery I'd seen earlier. Even the emails I'd received from Dr. Willard were stored there. Every interaction carefully crafted, automated fake. I froze when I heard the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway. Someone was coming. My stomach dropped as the sound grew louder, deliberate, stopping just outside the door. I darted behind one of the cabinets, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door creaked open. I held my breath. A silhouette stood in the doorway, its shape wrong somehow. Too rigid, too still. It stepped inside, and I caught the glint of metal, a security badge swinging from its chest. As it moved closer, the fluorescent light flickered again, revealing the cold, unblinking eyes of a humanoid figure. A machine. I bolted, leaving the door open behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps following. My mind raced with what I had seen, piecing together fragments of the truth. Cranford wasn't a university. It was a front, a place where humans were replaced. Faculty, students, anyone could be swapped for these lifelike constructs. And I had stumbled into the heart of it. I fled to my car, my chest heaving as I locked the doors. My laptop and notes were inside. I needed to expose this, but my inbox pinged with a new email before I could even leave the lot. Dr. Hendricks, your actions tonight have been noted. For your safety, we advise against further inquiry. We are watching. Cranford Administration. I left campus that night and never returned. To this day, I don't know what Cranford's true purpose was or why I was spared. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being tracked, even now. I'm sitting in a small, windowless briefing room when I realize how badly I've miscalculated. The job description had been vague, but the money was too good to pass up. Critical server repairs, offshore location, they'd said. They didn't mention the 20-page NDA or the armed security guards patrolling the helipad. The helicopter ride over had been tense. The other passengers, 3 technicians, like me, sat in silence, their expressions grim. No one looked out the windows as the vast expanse of ocean gave way to the hulking black silhouette of the facility. It jutted out of the water like an iceberg, with only the tip visible and God knows how much hidden below. The security checkpoint was more invasive than any airport screening. They took my phone, my watch, anything that could transmit data. When I protested, the guard, a beefy man with a blank stare, simply said, "Policy." His tone brooked no argument. Now, I'm staring at the client contract in my hands. The words seemed to blur together, the legal jargon practically designed to confuse. But one sentence stands out. Failure to comply with security protocols will result in immediate termination. I'm not sure what they mean by termination, and I'm afraid to ask. We're led to the server room, deep in the bowels of the facility. The air grows colder with every descending level, the fluorescent lights casting an unnatural pallor. The room itself is cavernous, rows upon rows of humming servers stretching into the distance like monolithic sentinels. Our task is simple enough. Reboot a failed cluster and retrieve the corrupted files. But as we log in, the files we're accessing don't look like ordinary data. No spreadsheets or logs. It's video footage, thousands of hours of it. Some of the timestamps are decades old. One of the technicians, a wiry guy named Carl, mutters, "This doesn't feel right." He clicks on a file out of curiosity, and a grainy video fills the screen. It shows a man in a dark suit, standing at a podium, delivering a speech. I don't recognize him at first, until the camera pans to the audience. The faces in the crowd are unmistakable. Presidents, CEOs, world leaders. The footage cuts abruptly to a different scene. The same man, this time slumped in a chair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. The room is silent, except for a faint buzzing. We all freeze. "That wasn't public," Carl says, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shut it down." The team lead snaps. "Now!" But it's too late. The screen goes black, and the humming of the servers grows louder, almost deafening. The door to the server room locks with a metallic clang. My stomach drops as I realize we're trapped. A voice crackles over the intercom. "Unauthorized access detected. Please remain where you are." "Remain where we are?" Carl shouts. "Are you kidding me?" The team lead tries the door, but it doesn't budge. Meanwhile, I'm frantically scanning the room for any way out. A maintenance hatch, an air vent, anything. The monitors flicker back to life. This time they're showing us, the 4 of us, standing in the server room, staring at the screens like rats in a maze. The angles are disorienting. The camera's catching details I hadn't noticed before, like the fear etched into Carl's face or the sweat dripping down the team lead's brow. "We're being watched," someone says. The obviousness of the statement doesn't make it any less horrifying. The next few minutes are a blur. Alarms blare, red lights strobing overhead. A voice on the intercom repeats, "Security breach. Personnel in breach area will be neutralized." Neutralized. That's the word they use. Carl starts pounding on the door, screaming for help. The team lead is frantically typing commands into the terminal, trying to override the lock. Meanwhile, I'm frozen, my thoughts racing. This wasn't about fixing servers. We were never meant to leave this place. Then the intercom cuts out, replaced by a low rumble. The servers around us begin shutting down, one by one, their hums fading into silence. I can hear footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy and deliberate. They're coming, I say, though no one's listening. When the door finally opens, it's not security guards who step through. It's men in hazmat suits, their faces obscured behind reflective visors. They don't speak. They don't explain. One of them grabs Carl, jabbing him with a syringe before he can protest. He goes limp immediately. I back away, my heart pounding, but there's nowhere to go. Another figure approaches me, holding something, a tablet, maybe. The screen displays a single sentence, "Sign for compliance." The implication is clear. If I refuse, I'll end up like Carl. If I sign, just maybe I'll survive. My hand trembles as I take the stylus. I press it to the screen, signing my name. The figure nods and steps back. Before I can react, everything goes black. I wake up in a hospital bed, my memory foggy. A nurse smiles at me, too cheerful to be real. "You're lucky," she says. "Your team had an accident, but you pulled through." No one will answer my questions. About the job, about the facility, about what happened to Carl and the others. When I check my bank account later, I see a deposit for twice the agreed amount. I should feel relieved. Instead, all I feel is dread. Because every time I glance at my phone or laptop, I swear I can see the faint reflection of a camera lens staring back at me. Freelancing wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I've been a graphic designer for years, hopping from gig to gig, but when the email from Cortex Solutions landed in my inbox, I nearly spat out my coffee. They were offering double my usual rate for a short-term project. The description was vague. Add visuals for client outreach campaigns. Still, the money was too good to pass up. A reply and a brief exchange later, I was hired. The work itself was straightforward. They sent me vague templates, and I filled in the blanks. Simple, polished, clean, but the requests were odd. Ads for a shipping logistics firm one day, a high-end art dealership the next. The imagery they asked for felt disconnected, almost random, but I shrugged it off. Clients often didn't know what they wanted. Payment was prompt, and communication came only through a generic email address. No video calls, no phone numbers. A part of me enjoyed the anonymity. It meant I could work in sweatpants without judgment. The first red flag came when I saw one of my designs online. It wasn't where I expected, a banner ad on a trade website or a LinkedIn post. Instead, it was embedded in a news article about a police raid on an alleged smuggling ring. My graphic, clean, corporate, professional, was plastered across a warehouse facade in the background. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. Had they used my design for something illegal? I sent an email to Cortex, asking for clarification. The response came almost immediately. "Your work is as specified. Do not contact us further about this matter." The tone was icy, unyielding. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was a coincidence, but the knot in my gut tightened. The requests became stranger. One ad was for a vacation rental agency, but the copy included phrases like exclusive access and discreet locations. Another featured a photograph of a yacht with the caption, "Your cargo, your terms." I started noticing patterns, keywords that hinted at something far more sinister. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started digging. Cortex Solutions had no website. Their email domain wasn't tied to any known company. Even the payment processor they used was untraceable. I checked the LinkedIn profiles of the supposed contacts who'd reached out to me. Empty shells with no connections or activity. Panic set in when I searched for the businesses in my designs. Most didn't exist. The few that did were fronts, empty offices, disconnected phone numbers. It felt like trying to follow a trail that deliberately led nowhere. The final straw came late one night. I was scrolling through my portfolio when I noticed a file I didn't recognize. It was a video embedded in a folder I hadn't created. My pulse quickened as I clicked it. The footage was grainy, a shaky handheld recording of a dimly lit room. At first, it was hard to make out what I was seeing. Then the camera focused on a table, where stacks of money and weapons lay scattered. A man in a suit stood to the side, speaking inaudibly. But in the corner of the screen, barely visible, was one of my designs. My heart sank. It was printed on a folder, part of the imagery I'd created for that logistics firm. I shut my laptop, my mind racing. Someone had planted that video on my machine. Whoever Cortex was, they were watching me. I decided to call the police, but as I reached for my phone, it buzzed in my hand. A text from an unknown number appeared. "We know what you're doing. Stop now." I froze. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, the walls too thin. I checked the windows, pulled the curtains tighter, and triple-locked the door. My pulse pounded in my ears, the realization sinking in. I wasn't safe. The following days were a blur of paranoia. Every email, every message, every shadow on the street felt like a threat. I stopped working for Cortex immediately, sending a curt resignation email. But the damage was done. Weeks later, the police showed up at my door. They had questions about my connection to a global smuggling network. They showed me a photo of one of my ads spray-painted on the side of a shipping container seized in a raid. I tried explaining, but their skepticism was palpable. My designs, my name, were tied to crimes I knew nothing about. I became a suspect. Friends stopped answering my calls, my clients dropped me, and my accounts were flagged. I had no proof of my innocence, no way to fight back. It was as if the life I'd built was being erased piece by piece. I sit here now, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. The emails from Cortex stopped weeks ago, but the shadow they cast hasn't lifted. Every knock at the door makes my chest tighten. Every glance from a stranger feels like an accusation. I've thought about running, changing my name, disappearing. But what's the point? They'd find me. They always do. The invitation arrived in a sleek black envelope, slipped under my apartment door. The paper was thick and embossed, the kind of stationery that whispered exclusivity. An evening of opportunity, it read. No name, no sender. Just a date, a time, and an address. I almost tossed it out, thinking it was a prank, but curiosity gnawed at me. As an art dealer barely scraping by, the promise of mingling with wealthy patrons was too tempting. Besides, the address, an estate perched high on the cliffs outside the city, was infamous. Its reclusive owner, rumored to be an eccentric billionaire, was said to throw the kind of parties that shaped careers or destroyed them. When I arrived, I realized I'd underestimated the scale of the event. The estate loomed against the night sky, its tall iron gates opening as if by unseen hands. Rows of black cars lined the cobblestone driveway, their drivers standing silent and motionless. I felt the weight of eyes on me, though I couldn't see from where. Inside, the grandeur was oppressive. Chandeliers cast fractured light over the guests, who moved like shadows in their evening attire. I recognized no one, but that wasn't surprising. The kind of people who attended events like this didn't live in my world. A man in a crisp black suit handed me a small card with a number, 84. "Your bidding paddle," he said curtly. Before I could ask what we'd be bidding on, he gestured toward a set of double doors. "The auction is about to begin." The auction room was even darker than the hall. A single spotlight illuminated a raised platform in the center. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and I hesitated before taking a seat near the back. The air buzzed with tension, a low hum of whispered conversations. When the host appeared, the room fell silent. He was tall, gaunt, his face sharp like a knife. He wore no mask, unlike most of the other attendees, but his expression was unreadable. "Welcome," he said, his voice like silk over steel. "Tonight's items are unique, priceless, and, for the discerning among you, utterly transformative." The first item was a nondescript envelope. The host opened it with a flourish, reading aloud its contents. The truth about a certain scandal involving a prominent politician. Gasps rippled through the room. Bidding began immediately, numbers flashing in the dim light as the price soared into the millions. The next lot was more bizarre. A promise, signed in blood, from someone in the room to remain silent on all matters discussed tonight. The bidding was just as fierce. By the third item, I was sweating. The auction wasn't just surreal. It was dangerous. Secrets, favors, leverage. These weren't things you could put a price on. Yet here they were, traded like trinkets. Then came the fourth item, and my blood turned to ice. The host announced it with a slow, deliberate smile. The right to decide the future of 84. My number, my paddle, my future. All eyes turned to me. I froze, gripping the paddle so tightly my knuckles whitened. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The host ignored me, his gaze sweeping the room. "Do I have an opening bid?" The silence stretched, unbearable. Then a voice rang out. 1 million. The bidding war began, faster and more frenzied than before. My chest constricted as the numbers climbed. 5 million. 10 million. The bidders didn't glance at me. They didn't need to. I was just a commodity now, like the rest of the night's offerings. What happens if no one bids? I forced out, desperate to break the spell. The host's smile widened. Everyone bids eventually. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood, knocking over my chair. I didn't agree to this. My voice cracked, echoing in the cavernous room. "I'm leaving." The host tilted his head, amused. "You signed the invitation, didn't you?" I hadn't, but then I remembered the small RSVP card that came with it. A single checkbox, yes or no. I checked yes, and mailed it back without a second thought. Panic clawed at my throat. "You can't do this." "Oh, but we can," he said smoothly. "And you can still participate. Just place a bid." The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. If I could outbid them, maybe I could regain control. I raised my paddle. 50 million! I shouted, my voice trembling. The room stilled. For a moment, I thought it had worked, but then the host nodded. "Soul." I didn't understand at first. My bid had won, hadn't it? But then 2 men in suits appeared at my side, their grips like iron. They dragged me toward the stage. "What are you doing?" I screamed, struggling against them. You've purchased your own silence, the host said. His tone was almost kind. But it comes with a cost. The spotlight intensified, blinding me. I felt the cold weight of a document pressed into my hands. The text swam before my eyes, but one phrase stood out. Binding for life. The auctioneer leaned in, his breath cold against my ear. Welcome to the circle. As the men pulled me through a hidden door, the applause behind me thundered in my ears. When the advertisement popped up on my feed, it seemed harmless enough. Unlock the clarity of your past. Volunteer for groundbreaking memory enhancement therapy. At the time, I was desperate for answers. A trauma from years ago haunted me. A fragmented memory of an accident that left my younger sister in a coma. No amount of therapy had helped me piece it together. I submitted my application, half convinced it was a scam. But 2 days later, I received a response. Congratulations, you've been selected. The attached address led me to an inconspicuous gray building tucked into a quiet industrial park. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and faint coffee. A woman in a white coat greeted me with a warm smile, though her eyes were distant, clinical. We'll begin with a baseline memory scan, she said, leading me into a small, sterile room. Wires were attached to my temples, and a headset with tiny pinpricks pressed against my scalp. As the machine powered on, a strange warmth spread through my skull, like liquid light pooling behind my eyes. I blinked, and suddenly I was no longer in the room. Instead, I was back in my childhood home. The scene was vivid, more vivid than any memory I'd ever recalled. The scratch of my father's chair against the hardwood floor, the smell of burnt toast, my sister's giggle. It all felt real. Too real. When I returned to the sterile room, the woman asked, "What did you see?" I told her. She nodded, jotting something down on a clipboard. Good. You're an ideal candidate. The session started simply. They'd guide me into specific memories, gently prodding me to fill in the gaps. At first, it was exhilarating. I remembered things I hadn't thought of in years. My first bike ride, the name of a childhood pet I'd forgotten. But soon, the memories became off. During one session, I remembered a family vacation we'd taken to Yellowstone. But in the memory, my mother's voice sounded wrong, deeper, slower. And the sky above us was a flat, unchanging shade of gray, as though someone had painted it on. When I mentioned this to the technician, she dismissed it. The mind fills in gaps in strange ways, she said. By the fourth session, things had shifted. I no longer felt in control. The memory of my sister's accident, the one I'd come to unlock, hovered at the edge of every session, just out of reach. They kept pushing me toward it, their instructions more insistent. Go deeper, the technician urged one day. The headset buzzed, and the warmth turned to heat, prickling against my scalp. I felt as though my mind were being pulled apart, strands of thought unraveling faster than I could hold on to them. I was back in the memory of the accident. My sister and I were playing near a lake, her laughter echoing off the water. Then the moment shifted. Her laughter cut off, replaced by a scream. I turned to see her slipping into the water, her arms flailing. But something was wrong. The lake wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't remember a lake. The scene felt manufactured like a poorly constructed stage play. I ripped off the headset, gasping for air. This isn't my memory, I said. The technician didn't react, just scribbled on her clipboard. Your mind may need time to adjust. Let's try again tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lake, my sister's face blurred like a smudged photograph. My own memories felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. When I arrived for the next session, The waiting room was empty. The usual receptionist was gone, and the lights flickered faintly. The place felt hollow, as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. A clipboard on the front desk caught my eye. It listed names, most of them crossed out. Next to mine, the word pending was circled in red. Beneath it, another line read, "Subject no longer viable." I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. I turned to leave, but stopped when I heard a faint rustling down the hall. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, creeping toward the observation rooms. The door to one room was ajar. Inside, monitors displayed faces of other volunteers, their eyes vacant, mouths slightly open. Some twitched, their bodies jerking against restraints. On the largest monitor, my face stared back at me, frozen mid-session, lips moving soundlessly. Behind me, a voice whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." I spun around to see the woman in the white coat. Her smile was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. "Your memory integration is incomplete," she said, stepping closer. "If you leave now, you'll lose more than you gain." "What are you doing to us?" I demanded, backing away. "We're perfecting the process," she replied. Her tone was calm, detached, as though explaining a routine procedure. "Your memories aren't yours anymore. They're ours." I ran, through the halls, past the empty lobby, out into the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached my car, slamming the door behind me. As I peeled out of the lot, the building's dark windows seemed to watch me, unblinking. It's been weeks now. My memories come and go, slipping through my grasp like sand. Some days, I wake up convinced I never had a sister. Other days, I remember her so clearly it hurts. The worst part is I can't trust any of it. I've started keeping a journal, writing down everything I know to be true. But every time I reread my entries, the words feel foreign, like they were written by someone else. I don't know where my memories end and theirs begin. The town of Bradford wasn't even on most maps. A handful of streets, a diner, and fields stretching to the horizon. It was quiet, too quiet, but that was the point. The locals lived in whispers, as though raising their voices might call attention to them. I came here to write an expose about small-town decline, a fluff piece, really. What I found was something else entirely. It started with the animals. Dead livestock lined the edges of the fields, their bodies bloated and strange. The farmers spoke about it reluctantly, their eyes darting toward the sky as though afraid of being overheard. "Happens quick," one of them said. "No sound. Just find him like that in the morning." Then there was the land itself. Perfectly healthy crops were withering overnight, turning brittle and gray. When I asked about it, the locals muttered vague theories. Bad soil, pesticides gone wrong, even a curse. But their faces said something else, something they wouldn't admit aloud. On my third day in Bradford, I met Eleanor. She was a retired teacher, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to defy the town's heat. Unlike the others, she didn't shy away from my questions. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice low. "You need to look at Old Mill Road." I'd driven down Old Mill Road earlier, but it hadn't seemed unusual, just a gravel path bordered by overgrown grass. But Eleanor's tone made me reconsider. That evening, I took my rental car back there. The road was empty, save for an old barn that looked like it might collapse if a strong breeze hit it. The air was unnaturally still, and as I stepped out of the car, I noticed something strange. The barn's walls were riddled with tiny holes, like someone had taken a drill to them. The ground nearby was scorched, blackened in erratic patterns. A faint hum filled the air, so subtle I almost missed it. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I was crouched near the scorch marks when the noise started, a high-pitched whine, like a mosquito amplified 100-fold. I spun around just in time to see something zip across the sky, a streak of metal too fast to follow. Then another, and another. I ducked behind the barn as a sharp crack split the air. The ground where I'd been standing erupted, dirt and rocks flying in every direction. My ears rang as I pressed myself against the barn wall, heart pounding. Whatever was out there, it wasn't natural. When I made it back to town, Eleanor was waiting on her porch. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't need to. They'd been testing for years, she said as I stumbled up her steps. Ever since the corporation bought up that land. What are they testing? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She hesitated before answering. Autonomous drones. Military prototypes. They use us like lab rats, see what works and what doesn't. My stomach churned. Why doesn't anyone do anything? Her laugh was bitter. Do what? Complain to the government? They already know. Probably signed off on it. I spent the night at Eleanor's house, too shaken to return to my motel. She warned me not to use my phone or laptop. They monitor everything, she said, but I couldn't help myself. I needed proof. The videos I captured at the barn were shaky, but they showed enough. Flashes of light, streaks of movement, the scorched earth. I uploaded them to a cloud drive, my hands trembling as I typed. My editor needed to see this. The world needed to see this. By morning, my phone was dead. Not out of battery dead. The screen stayed black, unresponsive. I tried Eleanor's landline, but it buzzed with static. That's how they get you, Eleanor said grimly. First, they cut you off. Then they come for you. By noon, the town was in chaos. The hum I'd heard near the barn was back. Louder now, rattling windows and shaking walls. The locals scattered, locking doors and pulling curtains. I watched from Eleanor's porch as shadows passed overhead, sleek, silent machines darting between the clouds. One by one, buildings began to crumble. It wasn't bombs or missiles, just precise strikes, enough to bring down a roof, collapse a wall. A message, Eleanor said. They don't want you talking. We packed what little we could in her truck and fled. As we drove, I saw the extent of the damage. Fields leveled, homes reduced to rubble, and those lifeless animals lying in neat, unnatural rows. It wasn't destruction for the sake of war. It was a demonstration. I made it out of Bradford. Barely. Eleanor wasn't so lucky. When I turned to thank her for her help, the passenger seat was empty. The last thing I saw of her was in my rearview mirror. A dark figure standing in the road, hands raised as the hum grew deafening. Now, weeks later, I'm in hiding. The videos I uploaded are gone, erased from every platform. My editor says I'm being paranoid, but I've seen the cars idling near my apartment, the strangers lingering too long in the coffee shop. I still hear the hum sometimes, late at night, even when everything is silent. I should have known something was off when the onboarding meeting was held over a Zoom call, with the recruiter's face obscured by low lighting and an oddly distorted voice. But as a broke graduate fresh out of university, the internship sounded like a dream. A luxury cruise liner, all expenses paid, and a hefty stipend. Real-world experience with global media networks, they'd said. It seemed too good to pass up. The first day on board, reality hit like a cold wave. The interns were confined to the lower decks, a cramped maze of windowless corridors that reeked of damp metal and industrial cleaner. We weren't allowed above Deck 5 without permission. Our quarters were shared, 8 to a room, with thin bunks bolted to the walls. The orientation was a curt briefing by a man in a spotless white uniform who didn't bother introducing himself. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine," he said, his tone as sharp as the crease in his trousers. "Break them, and you'll wish you hadn't." We were assigned menial tasks, delivering trays of food to rooms, cleaning bathrooms, cataloging supplies. The glamour of the cruise was reserved for the wealthy passengers we never saw, though we could hear their laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the air vents. One of the interns, Mia, whispered to me during a particularly grueling shift, "Have you noticed how they're always watching us?" She gestured to the tiny black domes embedded in the ceilings. Cameras. Everywhere. At first, I dismissed her as paranoid, but the next day, I saw it for myself. I'd been sent to the storage room for supplies when I noticed a shadow in the corner. It didn't move when I did, and there was no noise other than the low hum of the ship. When I turned on my phone's flashlight, the shadow disappeared. But from the corner of the room, the glint of a camera lens caught the light. The first real crack in the facade came during the third week. One of the interns, Jamal, didn't show up for his shift. At dinner, his bunkmate muttered that he'd been summoned to the captain's quarters the night before and hadn't returned. When I asked one of the supervisors about it, he simply said, "Jamal's been reassigned." His eyes didn't meet mine, and his mouth pressed into a thin line. That night, Jamal's nameplate was removed from the door of our quarters. As the days stretched on, more interns vanished. They left no notes, no goodbyes, just empty bunks and whispers of reassignment. The work grew harder, the rules stricter. Every interaction with the staff felt like walking a tightrope. Any misstep, a late delivery, an unsanctioned trip to a restricted deck was met with cold, silent stares from supervisors who seemed to materialize out of thin air. One night, unable to sleep, I snuck up to Deck 7. It was forbidden territory for interns, but I couldn't take the suffocating air of the lower decks any longer. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with doors that bore no names or numbers. At the end of the corridor, a faint light spilled from a half-open door. Inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A room full of monitors, each displaying live footage from different parts of the ship. The lower decks, the storage rooms, even the interns' quarters. And on one screen, a small, stark room with Jamal sitting on a metal chair. His head was slumped forward, his arms limp at his sides. Someone stood over him, a tall figure in a black uniform, face obscured by shadows. I fled back to my quarters, my heart pounding. The next morning, I tried to warn Mia, but she shook her head. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "They'll hear you." "Who are they?" I demanded. She hesitated, glancing at the cameras in the ceiling. "This isn't just an internship. They're grooming us for something. The ones who disappear, they're being prepped for clients." "What clients?" I asked, but her eyes darted away. That evening, Mia was gone. Her bunk was stripped bare, and no one would tell me where she went. The fear was a suffocating weight on my chest. I needed to get out, but the ship wasn't scheduled to dock for another 2 weeks. The final straw came when I found my name on a clipboard in the storage room. Next to it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Prepared for orientation. Client, Deck 10. My legs almost gave out beneath me. I spent the next 2 days plotting my escape. The cameras were everywhere, but I noticed a blind spot near the service hatch that led to the lifeboat deck. That night, under the cover of darkness, I stuffed my few belongings into a backpack and crept toward the hatch. The corridor was eerily silent, the only sound the distant hum of the engines. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pried the hatch open, the salty air hitting my face like a slap. As I climbed down to the lifeboat, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, closing the distance. I didn't look back. The motor roared to life, and I sped away from the ship, the dark ocean swallowing me whole. When I finally turned around, the cruise liner was a distant silhouette, its lights twinkling like stars. I don't know how long I drifted before a fishing boat picked me up. I told them I'd fallen off a yacht during a party. They didn't ask questions. Now, months later, I've pieced together fragments of the truth. The clients were wealthy elites, and the interns, those who vanished, were auctioned off. Groomed, conditioned, and sold. I keep moving, never staying in one place for too long. I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching, waiting for the right moment to take me back. Every time I close my eyes, I see Jamal in that room, his head slumped forward, and I wonder if he ever had the chance to run. The recovered journal. We've been on the road for hours, the highway stretching endlessly in front of us. My younger sister Clara and I had planned this family road trip as a way to reconnect with our parents. They were in the front seats, chatting quietly, while Clara sat beside me, scrolling through her phone. I leaned my head against the window, watching the flat fields blur into the horizon. The diner was a spur-of-the-moment stop, a squat building with a neon open sign flickering erratically. It seemed oddly inviting amidst the monotony of the road. Inside, it was like stepping into another era. Vinyl booze, a jukebox humming faintly in the corner, and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there for decades. While my parents debated dessert and Clara checked her notifications, I wandered to a corner shelf stacked with forgotten trinkets. An old license plate, a rusted coffee tin, and a battered leather journal. The cover was cracked, the edges worn smooth. Out of sheer boredom, I flipped it open. The handwriting inside was shaky, uneven, like someone had written in a hurry. The first few entries were mundane, a road trip much like ours. Mentions of landmarks, towns, the weather. But as I skimmed further, the tone shifted. Words like paranoid and watched began to jump out at me. The writer described a sense of unease, a creeping fear of being followed. And then one entry stopped me cold. There's a van. No plats. It's been behind us since Nevada. Every time we stop, so does it? I'm afraid to confront them. I don't know who to trust. My throat tightened as I flipped through the remaining pages. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. They're closer now. Can't stop. Too dangerous. The last page was smudged, the ink running as though the writer had been trembling. If someone finds this, it means I didn't make it. Find something interesting? Clara's voice snapped me back to reality. I shoved the journal into my bag without thinking. Just some old book, I mumbled. Back in the car, I couldn't shake the words from my head. As we pulled out of the diner's lot, I glanced in the side mirror and froze. A white van was parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and I couldn't make out a driver. It could have been a coincidence. Probably was. But when we got back on the highway, the van followed. I told myself I was imagining things. It's a major road. Vehicles overlap all the time. But then it stayed with us. Every exit, every rest stop, it lingered in the background like a shadow. I thought about mentioning it to my parents, but it sounded ridiculous. What would I say? That I found a creepy journal and now we're being stalked? By the time we stopped for the night at a motel, the van was gone. I felt a wave of relief as we checked in. The fluorescent lights of the lobby washing away my paranoia. But as I lay in bed, staring at the popcorn-textured ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I got up and pulled the journal out of my bag, skimming the entries again. A phrase near the end stood out this time. If you stop, they'll come closer. The next morning, I was the first one in the car. As we loaded up, I scanned the parking lot. No van. My parents seemed cheerful, unaware of my growing unease. Clara was groggy, her earbuds already in as we pulled back onto the road. But it didn't take long before I saw it again. A few cars back, moving steadily with the flow of traffic, was the white van. My heart began to race. "Do you see that?" I blurted out. My dad glanced in the rearview mirror. "See what?" "That van. It's been behind us since yesterday." Clara laughed, not looking up from her phone. "You've been reading too many Reddit threads." I didn't push it, but as the hours passed, the tension in my chest grew unbearable. I started looking for signs, a turn signal, a sudden stop, anything to break the pattern. But the van stayed steady, unchanging. At a gas station that afternoon, I finally worked up the nerve to confront it. I told my parents I needed to stretch my legs, then walked toward the convenience store. The van was parked on the edge of the lot, its engine idling softly. My palms were sweating as I approached the driver's side. The tinted window reflected my own anxious face. I knocked. The window didn't roll down. The engine cut off. I stumbled backward as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap pulled low. He said nothing, just stared at me. "Why are you following us?" I demanded, my voice cracking. My parents were too far away to hear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket. I took another step back, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. Then he tossed something to the ground at my feet. A photo. It was worn, creased, but the image was clear. It showed a family standing in front of a car. Not my family, but one that looked eerily similar, down to the make and model of the vehicle. When I looked up again, the man was gone. The van, too, had disappeared. I stood there, shaking, the photo clutched in my hand. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, the van didn't reappear. For the rest of the trip, I kept waiting for it to materialize, but it never did. The journal, too, felt different, less like a warning and more like a trap I'd fallen into. I burned it in the motel parking lot before we drove home. The flames devoured the pages quickly, but the unease it left behind stayed with me. Even now, I sometimes see a white van in traffic and feel my chest tighten, because I never figured out who was in that van, or if they were still following. I can feel my hands shaking as I sit in the small, sterile interrogation room. The air smells faintly of bleach, and the cold fluorescent lights above buzz incessantly. They think I did it. They think I'm the one responsible for the explosion at the chemical plant. The explosion that left several people dead. The explosion that has ruined everything I've worked for. It was supposed to be a peaceful protest. We were only there to bring attention to the environmental hazards that the plant posed to the surrounding community. But when the explosion happened, everything changed. The corporation had been waiting for a reason to point the finger at me. And now, they've found it. They've framed me. My thoughts flash back to the day of the explosion. I had been part of the group that gathered outside the plant, chanting and holding signs. We weren't violent. We never were. I had just delivered my speech when the ground shook. There was a deafening roar, and then fire and smoke filled the air. I remember running toward the blast site, trying to help the people trapped inside. But the authorities arrived soon after, and they were quick to label us as suspects. And then they found the evidence, my fingerprints on a piece of the plant's damaged equipment. They don't know how it got there, but they're convinced I had a hand in the sabotage. The pressure of this situation weighs on me. The activists I've fought alongside now view me with suspicion. They think I betrayed them, that I somehow planted the explosive device. I feel like I'm suffocating. I want to scream, but instead, I breathe through my nose, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. I have to clear my name. As the days drag on, I manage to get my hands on a piece of incriminating evidence. A series of emails between the plant's executives. They're discussing how to make the plant fail in order to collect on an insurance payout. It's a plan that could explain everything. How the explosion was no accident. but I can't go public with it. Not yet. If I do, the corporation will kill me before I have the chance to reveal the truth. I take the evidence and go underground. I hide in plain sight, constantly moving, avoiding the police who are now hunting me. I send anonymous tips to the press, hoping someone will take interest in the story. But every step I take feels like I'm getting closer to the edge of a cliff, and one wrong move could send me tumbling into oblivion. The corporate machine is relentless. They hire private investigators to track me down, and the activists, who once called me a hero, are now sending out messages accusing me of treason. I can't trust anyone anymore. Then I find a contact, someone on the inside, an employee who works in the company's HR department. She's seen the emails I've uncovered, and she's willing to help me expose them. But she insists on meeting in a remote location, a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. I agree, hoping this will be the break I need. I sit at the corner booth, my heart racing as I wait for her to arrive. The smell of stale coffee lingers in the air, and the waitress eyes me suspiciously. The diner is quiet, too quiet for my comfort. And then she walks in. She's wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, her face hidden behind a thick layer of makeup. She slides into the booth across from me and glances nervously over her shoulder. "I've got the file," she whispers, pulling out a manila envelope and sliding it toward me. "Everything you need to bring this down. It's all in there." I hesitate, my hand shaking as I reach for the envelope. But before I can open it, a voice behind me interrupts. "You shouldn't have done that," a man says, his voice low and menacing. I turn to see a tall, broad-shouldered figure standing in the doorway. He's wearing a dark suit, and his face is partially obscured by a mask. I recognize him instantly. He's one of the corporation's hired enforcers. The woman beside me freezes. Her eyes widen, and she opens her mouth to speak, but I grab her arm. "Run!" I shout. She bolts from the booth, but it's too late. The enforcer steps forward, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me out of the seat. The woman's scream echoes in the diner as he slams me into the table, knocking the envelope from my hands. He presses a gun to my temple. "Did you think you could just walk away?" he snarls. "You're nothing. You're nobody." In that moment, I feel the weight of everything I've done. The lives lost, the trust broken, the truth I thought I could expose. But then something inside me snaps. I'm not going down without a fight. I twist my body, knocking the gun away, and land a punch to the enforcer's jaw. He stumbles back, surprised, but it's enough for me to make a run for it. I don't look back as I sprint out the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I hear the enforcer shouting behind me, but I keep running, knowing that I can't stop now. I don't know if I'll ever be able to clear my name or if I'll ever be safe. But I do know one thing. I'll keep fighting, because if I don't, the truth will die with me. It's a small town, a place where nothing ever changes. That's why I chose it quiet, simple, and easy to blend into. My contract requires a month here, and the hotel seemed perfect. A cheap, no-frills room to rest between meetings. But from the moment I set foot in that room, something felt off. The landlord greeted me with a warm smile, his handshake firm, a little too firm for my liking. He seemed eager. "You'll love it here," he said, his voice like melted butter. "I'll come by every day just to check on things. Make sure everything is perfect." His insistence felt strange, but I shrugged it off. After all, it's a small town. People are friendly here, right? The first few days pass uneventfully. I spend most of my time working, reading over contracts, drafting emails, and preparing for the next few days of meetings. It's dull but necessary. But then I start noticing things. Small things at first. A picture frame I'm sure wasn't on the shelf before. A chair that's been moved slightly. Little things like someone has been touching my things. But I tell myself I'm overthinking it. Nothing serious. But then, the voices start. I first hear them late one evening. A faint mumbling like people talking behind the walls. It's too soft to make out, but it's there, just on the edge of hearing. I tell myself it's just the plumbing or the old house settling. But it's persistent. Each night, it's the same. I try to ignore it, but it gnaws at me. On the fourth day, I'm sitting at the small desk in the corner of the room, staring at the same contract for the 100th time. I try to focus, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me. I glance up, and there it is again. The picture on the wall. I know for a fact it wasn't there before. I don't know how, but I know. It's one of those moments where you're sure something's wrong, but can't explain why. I stand and walk over to the frame. It's a picture of a woman I've never seen before, her face partially obscured by the angle. Her smile is too wide, and her eyes, those eyes, they seem to follow me. A shiver runs down my spine. Suddenly, I hear the door creak open. It's the landlord. He's standing there, smiling that same unervingly friendly smile. "How are you settling in?" he asks, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes flicker toward the picture. I'm sure of it now, he placed it there. "Everything's fine," I say, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracks. He steps closer, too close, almost as if he's inspecting me. Good, he says, his voice lowering. "But I do think there's something else you should see." He turns and walks toward the door, gesturing for me to follow. I hesitate for a moment, but decide to go along. He leads me down a narrow hallway in the back of the house. The air smells old, musty, like it hasn't been aired out in years. He stops in front of a door at the end of the hall and unlocks it, pushing it open with a flourish. Inside is another room, small and dimly lit. The walls are covered with pictures, all of the same woman from the photo in my room. In each one, her smile is different, more unsettling. And they're all staring at me. I step back, feeling sick to my stomach. "What is this?" I ask, my voice trembling. The landlord smiles again, but there's no warmth in it this time. "It's just a small collection," he says. "I thought you'd appreciate it." "Appreciate?" I choke out. "Who is she? Why are all these here?" His expression hardens. "You shouldn't have seen this," he mutters almost to himself. "I thought you'd be different." Before I can respond, he turns and locks the door behind us. I'm alone in the hallway, with the echo of his words hanging in the air. Something inside me snaps. I rush back to my room, but when I open the door, the familiar quiet of the room is gone. The pictures on the walls are different now. New ones I swear I didn't see before. And in the corner of the room, on the desk where I had left the contract, there's a photo of me, taken when I wasn't looking. A photo of me sitting in my own chair in the very room I rented. I don't know what's happening here, but I know one thing. I need to leave, and fast. But as I head for the door, I realize the handle won't turn. It's stuck as if something inside the walls is holding it in place. I pull harder, but it doesn't budge. I am trapped. Somewhere behind the walls, the voices return. But this time, they're clearer. They're calling my name. And I'm not sure I want to know who's on the other side of the door. Don't forget to subscribe. You are the best.